Well, welcome everybody to Montessori Lives, and many of you know Eva. Eva Nislev is an educational consultant, a true all-rounder, and we're talking about your many hats, Eva, which I hope we'll get into this evening. But let's start with your Montessori story. How did you find out about Montessori? How did you get involved in this strange community that we have?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I was thinking about that this morning because I figured you're going to ask me that. Look, a long time ago, way back last century when I was in high school, my school had a thing about we had to do community service every Friday afternoon. And I played the piano and sang, and I ended up going to a special school which had an attached workshop to it, as they did in those days. And I taught music there for a number of years. I spent the afternoon. I really got to know the students and the young adults that were there. And it was Montessori. And the principal there, her name was Mrs. Starr, had trained with Maria Montessori in London. And so none of this actually I had any awareness of then. This was many, many years later when all of these sort of things came together for me. But I remember the equipment, and I remember her, and you know, she was just lovely and such an inspiration for me, so much so that I ended up actually going into special ed, which I taught in for 6 years, just sort of down the track for doing it. So that was my first exposure to Montessori. And then sort of I left school and went to uni and did a degree, and early childhood, primary, so I did that. And then when I had my first child, I looked at the local primary school, local schools, because, you know, as a young parent, you start thinking about, well, where are they going to go and what are we going to do with them? And I went to the local kindy and did roster, as you did in those days. And in the roster day that was there, they had a pretend kitchen, and I filled the basin up with soapy water, and the children were playing there, and the teacher came and she was horrified. She said, "What have you done?" And I was going, "Oh God, what have I done?" She said, "Why have you put all that water in there?" And I said, "Well, they're washing up." And she said, "But it's pretend washing up. What are you going to do with the water?" And I thought, "Oh, tricky question here. Oh, we're going to put it on a tree outside." No, that wasn't what she's getting at. It was like, this is pretend. And I just didn't understand. I was really, really sick. I just didn't understand that you could pretend wash up when you could do the real thing. And I thought about it, and then I sort of talked to my daughter, and I said, "What did she do?" And she sort of told me the stuff she's doing. I thought, "Oh God, this is horrendous. I can't do this." And I found out a little private little Montessori somebody was running from their home, and so I went and knocked on her door and begged her, please take my child. And you know, I saw the difference in weeks, and then sort of remembered my beginnings with Mrs. Starr, and so yeah, immediately enrolled, and within a year started my own kindy, in a way it's history from there on. So that's the beginning.
And what are some of the hats you wear now? What are you? What have you've got your fingers in so many pies? Tell us some of the roles that you have.
Okay. I'm a senior lecturer for the Montessori Institute of Australia, and the presenter in Queensland. I am a part-time, although more like full-time, but I'm an academic. So I teach in the School of Education for a number of universities, but particularly ACU in their education field. I work a lot with master's students, particularly looking at development, early childhood development, leadership, and the arts, so looking at pedagogy. I think one of my missions, I'm going down a different rabbit hole, Mark, sorry, you'll have to keep me on track, I'm not good at that, is that I have as my personal mission that everything I teach, every subject, regardless of what it is, I get Montessori into it. I kind of think that I'm infiltrating from the, from behind. I'm sort of, that sniper that comes in from behind and gets everyone. So that's kind of what I do. I also have a little business that, along with a colleague, we do run STEAM projects in schools. I feel very strongly about the arts as a way of, I guess, differentiating for children. I think that hands-on creative thing is something we do very poorly in schools. Integrating the arts through all of our curriculum area would, I think, make such a wonderful difference. And I know Montessori does that beautifully. It's just in a lot of places, the powers that be try and kill that and make it really, really difficult for us. So I do that. What else do I do? I've not currently, but I've had some time over the years. I've spent time in Inner Mongolia, where I teach early childhood, mainly pedagogy, in the University of Hohhot in Inner Mongolia. And these are students who are doing early childhood degrees, but they're also doing English. And so I come in and give them real experience of an native English speaker, teaching them early childhood pedagogy from our point of view and in English. And so that's been an extraordinary, challenging and an amazing experience. I think COVID kind of killed that, but that was something that internationally that really changed a lot of my thinking around how people learn.
How so? Say more.
Well, I was asked to teach a class, and I thought I'll give this a go. And really, I've travelled quite extensively. I was born overseas. I thought I was fairly able to do this, but going to a country where nobody, and I mean nobody except my interpreter, spoke English. I think I was probably the only Anglo-Saxon person there. I was certainly the only woman over 5'6". Small children would stop their parents in the street and point and laugh and then run away. So I was a bit of a novelty. Going through customs, I said I was off to Inner Mongolia, and they looked at me and said, no, that's not in China. And so I had to explain to them that actually it's one of your states or provinces. And then I arrived for my first class, and there were 110 students in it, and I was expecting maybe 30 or 40. So that was overwhelming, to say the least. But anyway, the style of teaching, the style of learning was so different, so incredibly different. And I really had to dig deep to try and make connections with students that were not used to having to think. So I'd say things like blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, what do you think? And they look at me blank. And then eventually somebody will say, well, tell us what to think. And that's what we'll think. And I go, okay, now I need to change again, So I had a lecturer, it was going to be on imagination. And I spent the night thinking, how am I going to do this? So I told my interpreter that I was going to come into the room a little bit late. And when everyone was seated, and by the way, when they're seated, they're on bolted benches. So there's 110 of them contained, like they can't escape easily. So you've got to stop them falling asleep up the back. I arrived on my horse, so I galloped in from the sideways and up to the front, and I parked my horse and I jumped off it and I patted him and I made all the horsey noises and turned around and said, you don't mind if I bring Star to class? And then and my interpreter's looking at me going, what?
Wow.
And anyway, so look, I think we had some fun. But I really was that strange teacher who came every year, and other teachers would come and look in the sidelines as where all 110 of us were doing the hokey pokey. Or yeah, it was a lot of fun, but it taught me a lot about connections and how to connect, and how to use our bodies to connect when things are really, really different. And I think that's why my love of the arts is so strong, and how I can see that we can connect with children who otherwise are finding it difficult to engage.
Which I guess is really what education is all about, right? Connection.
Yeah, connect. And our role is to build trust, because if there is no trust, there is no connection. And I will say to my students, young teachers about to go out, forget about the curriculum for the first week. Spend your whole first week building connections, building trust, getting to know your students, let them get to know you, build a foundation. That week you spend will pay off dividends down the track, with your teaching.
Did your Montessori background come? Well, it must have, but tell us how it came in handy in Mongolia. How did you infiltrate Montessori into
Actually,
Mongolia?
it was easy, because the two so the Chinese education system is based on an old Russian education system, but the two theorists they used, there was a Russian one I'd never heard of, but then there was Vygotsky and Montessori. It was like, whoa, I'm in. So yeah, that was a surprise, a lovely surprise, but yeah, it gave me a good connection there as well. So they knew about Montessori, and they're actually Montessori. There are fantastic Montessori schools. The International Montessori School in Beijing is extraordinary place. You've been there, Sarah Jane?
Yep.
Yep. I think the thing that stunned me about that one was they have double classrooms. So your 3 to 6 classroom, you have the child has 2 classrooms, identical. In the morning, they spend with the English teacher doing their classes. In the afternoon, they spend in the classroom next door, where the assistant now is the teacher, and it's all in Chinese. All the same materials. They just swap out. That was mind blowing. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. And they'd invented this whole yellow card materials for learning the Chinese characters. So exactly like our, pink and blue and all those series that we have, they had the yellow cards. That was amazing, and these kids were fabulous. Yeah. Yes. And well, while I was there, because we're now down this whole Chinese rabbit hole you got me into, in 2009 I spoke at the international conference there, and I was very, very lucky to meet the woman who they call the mother of early childhood in China. She was 91 then, and I got to interview her. I went to Beijing Normal University and had green tea with her, a lot of green tea with her, and chatted to her about how Montessori came to China and how she did it. And she was telling me, I said, how did you get the books? How did you get the text? How, all of those things. And she said, when the uprisings came, her sister and brother-in-law had got out and they went to California. And she had been very interested in Montessori. She and her husband were academics, and they would photocopy or print pages of her text and just send her, and she slowly gathered all of these pages together to have the books over time. What a great story. Yeah. So she was amazing.
How do you think Montessori is accepted now in China at the moment?
I don't know, Mark. I haven't been back now for 3 years. I think there are parts of China that it still is, like I think Beijing, it probably still is thriving. I think there are areas that it probably is doing really well in. But as far as their overall education system goes, I don't know. It's that, it doesn't fit well with prescriptive teaching. And that was the big thing that I found really challenging. You know, this rote learning. You tell us, we write it. You give us the exam. So I had to give, I had to give exams or exams at the end of each course that I did, and you know, the English was really, really basic. So I would do the true false. I'd do some multiple choice and really short answers, short sentence answers to stuff. But what I'd found that the students had been doing was they had been taking photos of my slides. So when it came to exam time, they were all sitting, going through the slides to do the answers. And then the answers would go up the row. So I worked out very quickly that when I collected them, I collected rows, because if there was one in the wrong answer in the row, there'd be multiple ones wrong in the row. Doing that. So yeah, this ability to think outside the box, to be creative, was something that was quite challenging for me. But they wanted it; they were craving it. You know.
Yeah, that was my impression from being there in January, that that there was an intense interest in Montessori among educators there that I met, because of that. You know, they see it as a counteraction to this requirement for memorization, which is imposed by the language, right? The need to learn so many characters, to memorize so many characters. However, the government seems to be, from what I understood from what was explained to me, is the government seemed to be quite suspicious of Montessori, or wary of it, because it's seen as a foreign idea, and if you could somehow portray Montessori as a Chinese invention, that it would be welcomed wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you've made, because I was thinking just on the weekend, there was a little thing that was sort of making the rounds of social media. And it was about the 5 top companies in the world, and I'm sure you all know them, but all 5 companies are all Montessori. The CEOs are all Montessori kids. What was interesting, except for Steve Jobs, but his kids were all sent to that. The big thing is that none of them allow their children to have digital media and have anything to do with it, which I found quite extraordinary. That was what that actually was about. So yes, maybe there's a little bit of fear that these capitalists, you know, Montessori and capitalism is going to come in and I don't know.
Yeah. What was your research on? What's your doctorate about?
I am really interested in aesthetics, and so we're told in education, certainly in early childhood, that we should have an aesthetically pleasing environment. But what does that mean? Where does aesthetics come from? How do you get an aesthetic awareness? You know, we keep talking about your children are going to learn, develop an aesthetic awareness, but what actually is that? What does it look like, and where does it come from? So my study was looking at exactly where did teachers get it from, and I did case studies of early childhood teachers in very different teaching pedagogies, so including one in Montessori, and it comes from home. We can spin on our heads to teach aesthetics. It comes from way back, and it comes from the home. It comes from your familial background as to what you think a good aesthetic is. What's interesting is there are a lot of people will tell you that they have no taste or they have no aesthetics. And whilst I might agree with them, from a research point of view, when you talk to them and just say, hey, well, what was your home like? What were things? They'll say it was really bland, or we didn't have anything, or we had, you know, stock stuff on the wall that came from Amart, or you know, well, it didn't exist then, but that type of thing. So they actually had great difficulty in putting something together that they felt was aesthetically pleasing, and pleasing to them, they didn't know what was pleasing for them. So coming back and just saying, well, let's look at these pictures. I showed them pictures of different environments. Tell me which one you like. What appeals to you about it? What are the things that make you want to be in that classroom as opposed to this classroom? Yeah, so that's what it was about.
Are people's aesthetic sense, is it influenced by general culture, or do you think it comes wholly or more from the family of origin?
My research showed it came very much from the family of origin. And then as depending which pathway people went into would depend whether they had opportunity to develop that. And so even going into classrooms, I went into one teacher's classroom and it really was pretty minimalist. It was pretty bare by any standards. And I talked to her about that and I said, oh, I notice you don't have any prints up. She said, oh yeah, I've been thinking about that. Or, had you thought about bringing some plants in? Yeah, probably should. And then so when we started talking about, well, what was home like? Well, it was very, very bare. And I said, did you have any artwork? She said, yeah, we had a crucifix and that was it. And she said she had great difficulty trying to make things work. And because she had no confidence with that, she just didn't do it. She didn't go there.
Yeah. So is there a Montessori aesthetic?
It's a good question. I think my understanding of Montessori is that sometimes less is more. And I think the aesthetic comes from understanding the culture of the child. So yes, we have lots of things in common in classrooms across the world. Same equipment, we have low shelves, we try and have lots of light, we try and make it homely, all of those things that Montessori talks about in her personal notebook around classrooms. But my home in Italy is quite different from my home in Brazil, which is quite different from my home in Japan, which is quite different from my home, in Australia. And so I think we echo, and we should echo, that cultural aesthetic that the child comes from and is living in. Did that answer your question? Probably not.
Yeah. Well, do you think that sort of minimalist Montessori aesthetic, do you think that serves children in general? Or do you think it's something that's sort of grown up around Montessori that's kind of an artifact that it, is just something that we do, but is not necessarily serving learning in the child? We have this idea that less is better because it's less confusing and less distracting, right? Do you think that that's true in Montessori?
I think I think the personality of the teacher is kind of it comes through in classrooms. I've been into Montessori classrooms that I would have been extremely uncomfortable personally being taught in. They were far too cold for me. I need more warmth to be my best self within that class environment. So I
what does
think
that
you
look
have
like
to be,
for you?
well,
what
my
would your
classroom had
classroom
my classroom has lots of plants in it. My classroom had animal, we had hermit crabs and silkworms and all those sorts of things going on during the year. Probably a lot more arts rich things in the environment. I would have feature paintings, we had feature music, a lot of science experiments. So yes, it probably had more going on in it than perhaps some other people's classrooms would have.
Yeah.
Ilona, and I'm not
to
saying it's right or wrong, Ilona.
jump in, yes.
I have a question for Eva. except for order, what do you think are the main guidelines for an aesthetic environment in a Montessori classroom?
Well, order is so important, isn't it? You know, the child is building their brain. We think about that in the classroom and how we build that up to support the order and the character classification, all the stuff that's happening for the child for doing it. I think there has to be an atmosphere. I think your classroom climate or atmosphere is hugely important. And this comes back to my original around trust and building relationships. You can have the most beautiful things, but if you're not comfortable in the environment, you are not going to get the most out of that environment. So yes, order, but I think this comes back to, you know, what do we bring from the children into the classroom? What makes them feel comfortable in that space? So I think your aesthetic should mirror that or echo that to some degree. I'm fairly tidy, so I managed to do that without it being too chaotic. I don't know, Alona, did that go anywhere close to answering your question?
It's very good, thank you. I take notes, you know.
Oh.
So what did you have on the wall, Eva?
So I used to have every fortnight I would feature an artist, and so I would have a piece of artwork or photo of a sculpture, or I brought in sculptures. I have quite a lot of artwork, so I guess I was fortunate. The children perhaps were fortunate in that regard, and that often became a starting point or a hook to then travel off into other areas of the curriculum doing that, whether it was looking at the color or where the artist came from, which would then take us to the map and it would take us to the flags and it would take us to the rivers and it would take us to, you know, like you go down all these rabbit holes with the children. And that's what I love about Montessori more than anything else is, you know, my personality of wanting to go down rabbit holes was really supported by the children who came down rabbit holes with me or led me to rabbit holes, and away we went. And I think that is such a strength of the Montessori pedagogy and the curriculum, is that it enables you to do that for every child. You know, the one who comes in and has just decided they're into worms. Wow. Okay, 3-part puzzle. Let's learn about the worms. Where do they come from? Let's go dig up worms. Let's start a worm farm. You know, all of those things. What do they eat? It's so rich. It's so rich. It's language rich. It's cultural rich. And I think that's the reason why Montessori kids do well. I think that's why they're innovative.
Yeah. So you're, you know, as I'm sure everybody's aware, you know, traditional education in this country is really collapsing right now, and it's undergoing a severe crisis. And Eva, you're really on the coalface in many ways, in that you're teaching in traditional education, teacher education programs. Do you, how do you infiltrate Montessori into those programs? Do you think it offers a solution to so many of those problems that we're seeing in traditional schools?
Absolutely. I think if, you know, I've been saying for decades, we need to blow the education department up and start again. They keep reinventing the wheel. You know, I don't know how many times in my career phonics has been invented. And I sit there and go, oh God, here we go again. Right, we got phonics again. And now I was just talking to Mark earlier, in New South Wales, because I teach nationally, in New South Wales, they brought in a thing this year that all the teachers were going to be retrained or trained to do explicit teaching. Like, you know, hello? Do teachers not know how to do that? have we not been doing that? But it's because our NAPLAN results are so poor. And in Queensland, we are suddenly having to teach reading. And guess what we're all learning? And all the teachers and all the schools are paying thousands of dollars out of their very minimal budgets to send their teachers off to do Australian. And sorry, I've become a bit cynical about it, but it really annoys me because there's such a I don't know, there's such a barrier about Montessori. It's like people are scared. They're scared it's going to work. I think they're scared it's going to work.
Do you talk about Montessori in your classes?
All the time. I can slip it in anywhere.
Yeah. How is that received?
Yeah, usually with interest. There'll be somebody who say, "Oh, I need to know more," and or they'll come and I say, "Oh, if you want to know more, come and see me afterwards," or shoot me an email and I'll send you a link. Or I'll just, it might just be a comment like, "Oh yes, in Montessori we've been doing that for 120 years," and they go, "Oh, okay, didn't know that. Who's Montessori? Oh, let me tell you."
Yeah.
So there are lots of opportunities.
Yeah. How do we go about blowing up the education department? Do you have any plans to go out in the dark of night and with a Molotov cocktail and
yeah,
you're in the thick of it. You're in the university in the thick of it. How can we do this? I mean, we need people in your position to really be the ones who are throwing the Molotov cocktails and doing this. But I guess it's hard for just you as a single person to be doing that. But how can we do it as a movement?
Well, I think that is it. It has to be a movement, and I think people have to be united in wanting that to happen. So that's number one. I think one of the areas that we haven't tapped particularly well are parents. They're the drivers. They're the ones who make decisions. They're the vote. There's only so many of us teachers. I mean, what is the percentage? I think I saw in the world percentage that it's 0.0000002% of children in the United States go to Montessori. This is where their 5 top companies are run by Montessori people. But, interesting fact, isn't it? Why isn't anyone going, wow, how did that happen? Is that a coincidence? But, it doesn't happen. So I think the parents is something that perhaps we need to rethink how we do that. Short of infiltrating the Department of Education, which I can't see myself doing because I'd probably be fired within by the end of the day. I don't know that's going to work. I don't think I'm the right person I don't have quite enough subtlety for that. But yeah, we do need to, I think it's a multiple attack, Mark. I think there's got to be many prongs in that fire.
Well, it's my favorite question is, why is it that after a century and a bit, why is it that Montessori is still so little known, has had such little effect on society compared to, Montessori's vision of reforming society from within? It's been a century, and yet Montessori is really, in my back of the napkin calculation is that in Australia we educate 0.012% of children through Montessori. Only 0.5% of schools in this country are Montessori. And yet, one of the first Montessori schools in the world was a public school in Sydney, Blackfriars. Why is it that we're still so, what do you think it is about the movement? Is it us or is it them?
I think it's a combination of it. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head now, your children are at school for a certain period of time. So it's very much in your consciousness or your face at that moment for that time period they're there. And then they finish school and it's like, I've got other things to worry about now. So maybe we don't build up the longevity that we need in order to keep the pressure on, because there's this continual turnaround of children and continual turnaround of families through the system who will do their bit for the time they're there, but then they leave and they go on to, you know, other pastures. So maybe that's got something to do with it. I don't know. Anyone else want to buy in on that?
Yes. Anybody else have a question or a comment?
Sorry, I'm just going to put my 2 bobs worth in. Michelle, everyone. Just the comment you made, Eva, about why I suppose it may not have been so readily taken aboard now, for example. I was listening to a webinar today all about handwriting, for example, and the lady was mentioning that, of course, there's a connection between what the hand does and the brain, and isn't it? And so, but there was a lot of research that she was talking about, current research, backing up this fact. And of course, I was thinking the whole time, well, similar to what Mark was saying, well, you know, over 100 odd years ago, this was known, but of course we don't, it's not necessarily public knowledge about the link of the brain and the science behind it until more recently, I suppose. So is that something that maybe with science now backing Montessori could be put forward a little bit more readily, I suppose?
That's a really good point. And to you listening to that webinar, some research that's very recently just coming out now. We're looking at digital technologies, which of course in Montessori we're very on the shelf about for really good reasons. What this research is showing us, which is really scary, is that they're looking at children's brains who are playing with digital devices, which actually the Australian government, American, French, many others say, do not go near till you're 2, and some of them say 3. And yet, how many times do I see babies sitting there, you know, with iPhones, etc. But anyway, the research is saying that the brain is not producing the grey matter. So the connections are not happening for the children. So we're having all sorts of ongoing problems then with higher order thinking, with things like even self-regulation and all of those types of things. So there are actual physical changes to the chemistry of the brain that are coming about because hands and brain are not working together in the way that you're talking about, Michelle, about getting dirty, about feeling the weight and texture and all of those things, those sensory inputs that we know are so incredibly important for the formation of a young child's brain. And so here's now fact stuff, supporting everything, as you say, we already know. But this stunned me that they've actually seen and noticed, and they can see that the grey matter in the brain is simply not there. So these brains are less dense than they were for, you know, my children, for instance. That's scary stuff. So maybe as this comes out more, that's an opportunity for us as Montessorians to come and say, well, actually, we've known that a long time, and this is what we do to make sure that doesn't happen.
Can you say more about the longevity project and that research? Yes.
So there's a project called the Longevity Project that's just been released. It's been 2 years in the making. And one of the studies that, and I've only looked at the tip of the iceberg of this, but one of the major things coming out of this is between our gut biomes, like the mitochondria that we have within our guts and the brain, actually talk to each other. And this was not known before. It was always the brain ran everything and told the gut what to do. what they're actually finding now is that the microbiomes and the mitochondria in our intestines actually have a life of their own, and they actually run the brain. They can actually tell the brain what to do, which is something completely new. And one of the studies they've looked at or one of the questions that went to the researchers was, why are we seeing so many more children with learning difficulties, and particularly the spectrum? Why do we suddenly have so many children? And one of the things they looked at is the environment has changed so enormously, and what's going into their eating, what they're consuming, it's not only highly, what's the word I'm looking for? What did you say? No, I can't hear you.
Processed?
Oh, processed, thank you. That's the word. Highly processed, but also all of the things that are sprayed onto our fruit and vegetables. We're eating things that aren't actually grown in our particular area. So they were saying things, you know, like your gut gets used to the things that are grown where you live. So, you know, people who live to be centenarians in Japan live with those certain vegetables and fruits, and that's what they grow to, and that's what their biome understands. One of the things they looked at then was, well, if we change that, radically change that, can we reverse what's going on for these kids? And they took two particular children, young children, around 3, who were demonstrating very severe symptoms of being on the spectrum. And what they did was they said, okay, let's work with the family. Let's really change what they eat, their environment, the parents' habits, attitudes, like everything. And let's see if it changes. And it did. It changed it so much that one of the children no longer had any of the symptoms they had before. That kind of freaks me out a little bit. Like, I think in my head I already know that. I think we already know that. But this is like, okay, there's actually stuff's going to come out now saying, how prepared are you to help your child? Because parents will come and say, oh, we need to fix this. Can you fix my child? And, you know, in the back of my mind, I always want to say, well, can I fix you first? But, you know, you're not allowed to say that out loud. So I have to think that one. But yeah, it is. Can I fix you first? How prepared are you to change in order to change the outcomes for your child?
Is that research widely available? Where
no, it's
people...
literally just came out last week. So I haven't even literally just came out last week. I have to get on top of it.
Yeah.
I'll let you know when I've got more.
Okay. What do you think are the ramifications for Montessori in terms of changes in the nature of childhood and even child biology? Like, we've known, I think it's public knowledge that puberty is happening younger and younger among children now.
Age which I teach.
Yes. So, I mean, does this change our timelines of human needs and tendencies in Montessori? And does that change, you know, the ages for sensitive periods and other markers like that we've taken as
gospel,
like eternal, you know, that are true, going back to cave people and forward to the colony on Mars? You know, is it changing childhood to the point where we need to rethink?
Well, what we know, Mark, is that yes, the physical development has changed. So we're getting this really early puberty, and you know, we're now talking about girls as young as 8 getting their periods, which is, you know, they're not ready, and that's the thing. Cognitively, they're not changing. Physically, they're changing, but the catch up cognitively, emotionally, spiritually, that's not going on the same rate. So we've got this physical thing that's flying along here and the other one's still here. And that's why we have this huge disconnect happening for children, and that's where we get a disconnect in their behaviours, in their coping in this huge, almost pandemic situation we have of generalized anxiety disorder across the population. We have, in this longevity thing, they quoted that 57% of children in the US have chronic health issues.
Mm.
That's over
Wow.
half the population of children. That's insane.
Mm. Is there research in the Montessori world about this, about like how changes in childhood are affecting our pedagogy, or should affect our pedagogy? How our pedagogy should change in order to accommodate those changes in childhood? Are you aware of any?
I'm not aware of a lot of it. I know there's a little bit of stuff being done around brain research. Maybe Steve Hughes is a better person to ask on that. I think the big question that you had there was, should we be changing our pedagogy to support this, or do we actually say, well, hang on, why are these changes happening, and perhaps we offer something for that not to happen. You know, when you see little girls and boys who are having to deal with physical changes to their bodies that the rest of them is absolutely not ready for, why aren't we horrified? We're horrified when a 12-year-old gives birth. We're all absolutely horrified by that. Why aren't we horrified when 8-year-olds get their periods? We should be.
Vicky, I wonder if you have thoughts on that, the change in childhood and how that affects our pedagogy.
Look, I've had a number of conversations recently just about the difference in children coming through today, and a variety of reasons. Now, my eldest is shortly to be 28, and he's high-functioning autism. And I just think that we are looking at a groundswell of change. And we looked at our generation, my two brothers and I, we were all probably interesting in our own ways, but we all just went straight through school, went to uni, went out and got a job. And all three of us have one child who's not following, I guess, optimum developmental pathway. Some years ago, it's interesting what you talk about, the research. I took my eldest some years ago to a genomic clinic in Brisbane, where he had gene studies done. The lady that runs it is a geneticist, and he was missing some genetic material, and in particular around methylation, which is the removal of toxins from the body. And I think there's a whole lot of study to be done in that. I personally don't think we're evolving. I believe we're devolving, and I believe we're losing genetic material as the generations roll on. That's probably a little bit of an outlier of a theory, and I've not tested that. But I've gone back to my 20s, and I have a flatmate who's working in special ed, has worked in special ed for a number of years. She's a music therapist and a teacher. And just the conversations that we have about the type of experiences that classroom teachers are having in schools, I think we need a wholesale look at what's happening for children. And yes, I think it's dietary, but my son turned 2 and refused to eat anything other than bread and cereal, which are the worst possible things to address the biome and inflammation issues in children. And I honestly tried every technique under the sun, and he was my first. So he was the one that actually made food and puree.
Experimented.
By the time I got to the third child, it was all out of a tin. You know, you as a parent, you start to lose your grip on reality, particularly if, like me, you're a working mum. But the subsequent 2 children have gone through life neurotypical and not experienced the same challenges. I think we do need to have a look at what's happening in our classrooms. Over the weekend, I had some wonderful conversations. Alex was in one with me where we were talking about the volume of children with additional needs coming through the schools. Are we moving into a new era of what a human looks like and behaves like and the needs? But again, typical education doesn't cater for variety. Whereas Montessori education has the capability to do that if our transform adults are implementing according to Montessori theory rather than according to hot housing theory. So what's happening with humanity? I have grave concerns, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I would echo that, and I'm in classrooms once a week, and you know, when you go into a classroom of 24, 25 children and 19 of those are diagnosed, 19, and the teacher is dealing with, you know, trauma and you name it, it's just not fair for anyone. Like, there is no successful outcome unless we change something radically.
I went to the CEL conference, or it was a workshop in Melbourne on Thursday. So it was run with the Department of Education and all sorts of various groups that go in and support families and children. And the first speaker was a professor who's did a survey of 10,000 children, and the stats are 48% of children have come from abuse. It was just so depressing. So that's sexual abuse, financial abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse. So we're dealing with this in our classrooms, as well as, you know, early onset puberty. And one of the things they also highlighted in this whole day is divorce is just it's manifesting in these children and building a lot of insecurities. And the big thing is, oh, well, the child's 2, don't worry about it, it'll get over it, it's only 2, it doesn't matter. And I sort of like put my hand up and I go, because I'm from Montessori, 2-year-old does matter. And I said, this 2-year-old, don't ever say it doesn't matter, because it's in that child. That child will be organically feeling the pain and strain of what's and the stresses that are already going on. And they said quite often, you know, they're dealing with all this. 48% of children have had abuse. The average abuse for sexual abuse is 3+ times. Very few children have only been abused once, so it's 3+. And they said the key with all of this, and this is what you're saying too, Eva, it's the quiet child. So it's the child you've said, it doesn't matter, they're okay, they're seemingly at school, they're working, they're the good child. And we as practitioners in the classroom need to be very aware of what's going on in the background of these children's lives, because that quiet child is the child that's going to have the problems much later on in life. They're going to be the flip out at teenagehood, the no-go to school, they're going to have the obesity, drug, alcohol problems. So it's the quiet ones that need to be really watched as well.
Trauma-informed practices is a growing area.
Yeah, it was so depressing.
You know, for
I
us
was
as
so
teachers.
depressed.
It's
so
it is
sad.
extremely.
It's so sad. No one's we're just not it's like, as Mark said, we are not. You know, I feel like bombing the governments and the Federal Department of Education. We need to just rip everything out and start again and prioritise children.
You're on my bandwagon.
Support parents from when they're pregnant. My game thing, I know I'm taking over from you, I'm really sorry, but I feel we should have a major plan of helping women who are pregnant to a child that's 18. And I
So
guarantee
can I add to that?
if we did that, we would have such less government need later on in an individual's life? Sorry, I'm banging on.
No, and you've actually made me think of something. Some more research here is looking at, it comes into epigenetics as well, but we look at how trauma or stresses in adults actually do carry on to children. So we know from research that third generation survivors of the Holocaust genome has changed and they carry that. They did a huge study of the pregnant women who were in New York during 2011. No, 2011. Yeah, 2011. I got it right.
2001.
2001 thing. I knew there was a one in there. 20, yeah. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. And they looked at first trimester, second trimester, and third trimester, and they followed them through, and they followed the children through. The children who were first trimester and their mums have not had any changes. Half of the children in the second lot had changes. All the children in the third lot, mums in their third trimester, had changes, markers on their genomes for the stress that mother carried. So you're absolutely right. It should be from conception, which is actually the Longevity Project talks about. In fact, it's 9 months before conception that we should be preparing both the male and the female for optimum, delivery of a child, and then all of those things that happen, for that child from conception, really, but certainly from early on, we know the mothers actually carry a huge load that carries on into children, and I don't think that there's an awareness of that either, or support.
Eva,
for
you're in classrooms in schools as a consultant, and you're also in IT initial teacher education programs. What advice would you give to a young, inexperienced teacher who's about to go into the classroom, either Montessori or non-Montessori?
Find another job. Look, it's tough. It's really tough, and I don't pull any punches. I tell them it's really tough. I tell them when they're going on their prac, I want you to make meals. I want you to make, you've got a prac for 3 weeks. I want you to make 3 weeks, lots of meals. I want you to take multivitamins. I want you to have all your washing. I want you to buy, so on Sunday night, you have your clothes sitting there for the next 5 days, because you are going to be burnt out. You're going to be stressed. You're going to deal with a whole lot of things. Doing your timetable and writing your lesson plans is going to be the easiest thing that you're going to do, because it's great. We have theory. I can tell you all sorts of tricks and trade that I have at my fingertips, but I'm not you on your first day with humans. This is the one job where you actually get paid to experiment legally on children. That's what teachers do on a daily basis. It is continual experiment. Every day is different. Every child is different. You're different. And so, my advice, just be kind to yourself. Really, Mark, that is number one. Do not expect you can change the world. Be kind to yourself, because it's the lifeboat theory, or the, when it drops down, you got to put your mask on first. If you are not in a good place, there's no way you can help anyone else.
If you don't have a good relationship with yourself, it's hard to make relationships with children. And coming back to what you were saying earlier, that's what education is really, the crux of it is making a connection.
Yeah. That's trust. And I mean, that's what Sarah Jane was saying. We've got to make connections with these lilies. Those connections are so important. If we have connections with them, then we have that possibility for them to trust, to be able to get help, to feel heard, to have agency, all of those things that, you know, we bandy off, but what does that actually look like, and how do we make that actually work? And it is trust is huge.
Well, Eva, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been fascinating, and we could talk for hours, I'm sure.
We could.
But,
yeah, well, thank you so much, and thank you for coming along. I really didn't think anyone would come along, but
just one quick question. Where's the longevity project coming out of?
So the main person whose name is escaping me, but it came out of the States doing that, but with people from all around the world, experts from all around the world, who are experts in various areas and holistically as well. So it's not just, you know, academics or doctors. These are people who are also, you know, yoga experts or what is. So I think that's one of the things that I really have liked about it, is that it really is an holistic view of what we could do, and you know, what changes are and how we can affect change for everybody.
Great.
And
I'll
what
look
was
out
the
for-
research that Sarah mentioned?
Hold tight. I'll just go and get my bag, because I've got it in my bag. Hang on.
Put it in the chat. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It does. I've still got to get it out of my bag, though.
Oh, okay. Well, run, Sarah, run.
Eva, while we're waiting for Sarah Jane, do you have a book that you think all new teachers should be reading?
Two books. I think they should be reading Alice in Wonderland, and I think they should be reading Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh.
All the answers are in both those books.
Wow. Yeah.
So I went to it's the Mental Health and Child Information Sharing Scheme, and the research was it was Professor Daryl Higgins, whose Australian child maltreatment study he did. And that's with the shocking stats of 48% of those experience maltreatment go on to develop a mental disorder. So just what I'll do is, and that's his thing, they actually sent me an email today with lots of contacts of who you can, organisations and things like that. So what I'll do is I'll send it to Mark, and then you can distribute it, because it had the email they sent to me today was absolutely fantastic. So it's ACMS, the Australian Child Maltreatment study. So it's Australians who experience maltreatment with his study, 2.8 of the population out of the 48%. There's mental disorders, there's PTSD, there's generalized anxiety, and then all these 48% are more likely to have a severe use of alcohol, and also a high increase of major depressive disorder. So societally, we end up dealing with all of that, and governments have to pick up the tab for this. So, and the government, with the thing that was discussed, there are the most wonderful services that are offered, and I've actually distributed that to my staff today, so that, you know, they can give something to a parent. You know, there's Care Australia, there's all sorts of things.
Yeah, there are lots.
The government, federally and state, in all states, I think, are really busting themselves to do the best they can in this really difficult arena. And there's always room to improve, but I think with what we have in Australia is far better than so many other countries. And yes, they're stretched, and yes, resources are tight, but there are still a lot of there's a lot of hooks that staff can hook into to help, given that, you know, with most classes, there's at least half that are dealing with some sort of disability. So I'll send all of that to Mark and get him to do it. Would that be easier, Mark?
Sure.
Yeah. I'll
Thank
do
you.
that tomorrow at work.
We have our work cut out for us as Montessorians, and Eva, thank you for the work that you're doing in getting Montessori into teacher education.
Pleasure. Lovely chatting to you all, seeing you all, and look, I think it can only get better from here. Eventually they're going to run out of, you know, reinventing the wheel, and they're going to go, oh, maybe we should try this Montessori. It's just hard work, isn't it? It's hard work getting the recognition that it deserves, and I think dispelling the fear. You know, I think that's a lot of how we can go about dispelling the fear. We need to get some wins on the table, and that's possibly what where a starting point.
Thank you, everybody. See you in a
Thanks,
couple of
Mark.
weeks. First and third Mondays of each month.
Thank
you.
Mark.
Au revoir.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.